The floor is all yours.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Happy December. I know I shouldn't be doing dates and stuff in title webinars, but hey, it's the first day of December at the end of 2020, and I cannot wait for 2021 to hopefully be better. So, I'm throwing it in there. Glad everybody could make it on. Appreciate your time. I'll try to go relatively quick through this because I want to leave some time open to questions. But today we're going to be talking about the Roadshow and kind of what's, I should say Roadshow, excuse me, roadmap, what's planned, what has EasyIO been up to. Obviously, with the change in being acquired by Johnson Controls a little over a year ago now, we've had some changes go on. So we're going to talk about what we've kind of done, what we're doing, and what the plan of attack is coming into 2021. So, hopefully there's some good stuff. I think some of you may already be aware of some of these things, but if not, I want to make sure that we throw it out there. So little logistic stuff. If you do have any questions, like I said, we'll kind of open it up towards the end of the session to where if you want to talk, you absolutely will have that ability. We'll make sure and unmute you. But we also have the chat function in WebEx, so definitely feel free to throw up anything in the chat function. If you have something specific to myself or another one of the hosts, make sure you hit the little drop down in the two drop down box there and make sure you're sending it to who you want to. If not, it will by default go to everyone. All right, with that, let's go ahead and get started. So, excuse me. All right, so let's kind of talk about like where we came from, what we've done. Okay, so we're basically looking a little bit in the past. A lot of you know this stuff, but it's kind of nice to just do a little refresher. So back in May of 2020, so you're talking, 6 months ago or so, wherever we were at, we came out with some new firmware and features in the FS. So just like if you're familiar with EasyIO, then we try to build a very, very good piece of hardware. And when we first come out with that piece of hardware, it's going to be kind of basic, right? It's going to have some basic functionality, and then we start adding more and more things to it to really try to push that processor and those resources. So back in 2020, you can kind of see some of the things we added. We basically enhanced BACnet pretty dramatically. And a couple of the key features is we add BACnet time sync and trend logs at the BACnet level. So that was pretty cool. We did a major rehaul on the low level or in the OS level where we took all of the daylight savings time, all of the time syncing, all of that stuff from Sedona. We took it out of Sedona and put it down at the OS level, which on the FS series happens to be Linux. That makes it much more robust. You don't have to worry about, things messing up in Sedona and then being ported backwards and all that, so on and so forth. So what that allows for us to do is be able to update that NTP server and those functionalities much easier at a Linux level than have to deal with it at the Sedona level and then again port it back through. It also allows you as a system integrator to be able to set all that stuff from the web browser. As you probably all notice, a lot of the stuff that we're doing is at the web browser side. So a lot of we call them plugins or add-ons, that type of functionality to where you go to the web page and you'll hit that little plugin drop down and you'll be able to do a lot more things, change IP addresses, NTP, MQTT, all that stuff. So we want to make it easier to where you don't have to have a software programming tool physically on a laptop to do some very basic things like change your time. You should be able to just connect up with your phone or a tablet, open a browser, and be able to do that. So that's pretty cool. Another thing that we did was reduce the kit code size. We know that having that 250 KB size limitation on the kit's S code is problematic for everyone. So what we tried to do was kind of go through and massage our kits, get rid of some redundancies where we can gain efficiencies by cleaning things up. We did to kind of reduce that size a little bit because we knew that as we started enhancing, for instance, BACnet and adding time sync and trend logs, guess what? That kit size gets bigger. So that means we have to, kind of massage other things to reduce the size so you're not hitting that 250 KB limitation on the controller or on the Sedona framework. Because again, just as a reminder, the kits.s code limitation is not controller based. It's not that, it should be so much more in the FS. That is a Sedona framework limitation. So whether you're using, one of our smallest controllers like an FW08 or an FT04 or the FS32, which is, the most powerful controller on the market, that limitation is exactly the same across all of those platforms. So we tried to kind of clean that up a little bit. On again, just kind of going through some of the stuff that we did. So on the FW, we added spanning tree protocol. That is the looping on the Ethernet. Some of you may have touched it, may not have, but essentially we allowed for a loop, continuous daisy chain on the Ethernet. And if one of those connections would happen to fail, the controllers were smart enough to be able to fix that network communication loop and reroute the traffic. So again, basically a big circle or a loop on Ethernet. Same type of thing with the daylight saving stuff. We put all that stuff to the low level or the Linux level, helps make things run better. We did update the time protocol to version 4. We're trying to keep all of that kind of open source stuff as up to date as possible. Same thing, added BACnet time sync and trend logs. We reduced the kits code sizing. And then one of the things that was really requested by myself and many of the people that are on this phone call, as well as others that are not, was in the FW series, you got to have the ability to do BACnet MSTP server, right? Serve out the data, your points via a BACnet MSTP network, so it can be pulled into another front end, whether that's Niagara or something else. You got to be able to have that. So we updated a firmware and allowed for that functionality now. So that does have the ability to be BACnet MSTP server or Modbus RTU slave. Okay, so pretty cool. You have to choose on the FW. Obviously, you have to choose whether you're doing BACnet RS485 or Modbus RS485 because we only have one port. But you do have the ability to do either of those in the latest firmware. And there's obviously, just like all of our cool stuff, that there's no licensing that you have to worry about picking this one or that one. Okay. CPT. So we did some updates back in May on CPT. Yeah, it was May. Now, time flies. So we wanted to kind of create a little bit smoother of a user interface. We added the plugin piece on the browser to make it more functional, to where you can, do the MQTT. You can do the COV subscription, viewer or user interface, that type of stuff. So we tried to kind of really make that platform where everything is much more user friendly from a web browser, that type of functionality. So we updated those kit files like we talked about, and the date code on that one was May of 2020. If you are in the United States, which I believe everybody on this call is, when you download a copy of CPT, the date code will be different and it will have an underscore BC. So just a little update on that. So what that is basically BC is Brian Cline, me. So what I do is I take our released version of CPT that's worldwide, and then I go in and I modify based on our region, which is the United States, right? Or the North America. So usually what'll happen when I update, usually it's a firmware will come out after CPT. So what I will do is I'll go to that firmware, I'll grab all the updated kits, I'll put those updated kits into a version of CPT, I'll modify the name of it, and then I'll put it back out for distribution to you. That way you don't have to worry about, when you get a firmware bundle, dealing with those kits, having to update your version of software and so on and so forth. So as long as you're downloading the latest copy from our website, our partner share site, so on and so forth, then you will have all of the kits that are available, including any ones that are bug fixed or so on and so forth. Okay, but when you go to the help and about CPT, it will still say May of 2020, even though the one that I put out may have been July of 2020. Just as a little FYI there. Okay. So in July, we have modified our web server in the FTO4, made it much more stable. This was part of the JCI acquisition. Part of their due diligence process is we wanted to make sure across the whole board that our web server was what it needed to be. Scrap the initial web server that we had. We put a brand new web server in it, and that's what's running now. Very robust and very stable now, which is good. So what are we talking about? So that was kind of where we came from. So let's talk about where we're at / where we're going. So the FTO4, cool little controller. I believe everybody's probably got their hands on it or seen it, and so on and so forth. So those controllers did not come with any type of a mounting clip. So when we first came out with it, I mean, this was, let's talk 2.5, 3 years ago. It was, how am I going to mount this thing? And it was like, well, you can use like double-sided tape or Velcro or something. I'm like, no, right? That's not the way it needs to be. So we came out with a prototype DIN rail mount. Some of you may have seen that if you've come to any of our road shows or any of the training classes. Usually I'll have one, but basically we did a 3D print of kind of what you see here on the page. It might be a little tough to see because it's actually a clear clip, but essentially what happens is there's little holes in the back of the FTO4, and this clip actually snaps into those holes, and then it's a standard DIN rail clip. So this does come in a pack of 5. I think right now, from what I'm understanding, is that it's an optional thing. So you don't have to buy the clip. Or the controller doesn't come with a clip. So if you don't want it, basically we're not throwing them in the garbage. So if you do want it, you buy this. They're relatively cheap. I'm not good on pricing and stuff like that, guys, just to be honest here. But they're relatively cheap, and then you basically buy what you need type of thing. Okay. They are clear. We did clear for a reason, and you can see in that top right picture, that's because we wanted you to be able to see your serial number, your MAC address, and the SSID, the default SSID, as well as the terminal assignments on the back of the controller, which is where the sticker is. Okay, so that should be coming out probably in the next week or two, if they're not already out on the pricing sheets, being able to order, so on and so forth. So we do have the AB. I believe everybody knows on the FTO4 we have the AB. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with this. The A stands for analog, so that's 2 universal inputs and 2 analog outputs. The B stands for both. That is 1 analog output and 1 digital output. So that is our plan of attack to go to market with these controllers full time. We did talk about doing a D series, D as in dog, and that would have been 2 digital outputs, but market feedback, voice of customer was they really didn't see a use for that. So at this point in time, we kind of put that on the back burner. So if you do see a need and you're like, man, I really want to use the FTO4, but I got to have 2 digital outputs, please let us know. Run it up through Brody, run it up through myself. That way we can get the product management and so on and so forth. Because if there's a demand for it, then obviously we'll do it. But the demand initially was either having 2 analog outputs or an analog and a digital. So that's why we stuck with the A and B there. Okay. All right. So this is going to be very exciting. Let's talk about what is happening and what we're releasing at the end of this month. So let's start with CPT. This is kind of going to be the framework. So everything that you've kind of been irritated with CPT, we're trying to fix. I'm not going to say we've completely fixed it, but I'll tell you a couple of the things for sure we have fixed. So let's start with the features. We expanded the memory support of the application for applications and kits 4 times the present size. Now, what does that mean? That's a crappy way of saying that. What that means is you have a 250 KB kits S code size right now. We quadrupled that. So now you have 1 megabyte. Now that still sounds small, right? But the cool thing is that means you can install every kit that is available and still have room left over. So you don't have to worry about going, oh, well, I got to decide whether I want to do mail and SQL database, or, how do I want to, I can't do BACnet if I do this. So we've increased that. So you can install any kit you want, plenty of room. Okay. So that is key number 1. Number 2, there is no more 7-character limitation on naming. Yay, praise the Lord. So that was something that, me as a system integrator before I came to be a part of EasyIO, I hated. Obviously, you guys deal with it. You come up with, cool naming or, some type of naming characteristics that you're like, instead of it being discharge air temp, it's DAT, right? We're kind of all used to that. Well, now you have the ability to do 31 characters, which is awesome. So one thing that I do want to make note of is that part of the CPT piece is that it is backward compatible also. So, and what I mean by that is this is what we're calling CPT 2.0. So when you start looking at the about versions, it's not going to be the 0.9 any longer. It's going to be 2.0. So you have the ability to take a 2.0 CPT and connect to older controllers as well. There will be pop-up notifications if you try to update an older controller with newer CPT files, right? So think about it. If I have, let's call it an FG running version build 53, so basically that's running the old Sedona 1.0.45, and then we're coming out with this new CPT 2.0 with new firmware to allow for all of these additional functions and features. If I try to install a kit that's CPT 2.0 into an older controller, you will get a pop-up saying, nope, you cannot do this. You need to either upgrade the controller or downgrade the kit. So we're not going to let you screw up controllers, basically. If you do create an application using CPT 2.0, and then you happen to put it into a controller, basically you downgrade the application, but your naming sequence is 12 characters. What happens is it'll actually just truncate that, and you'll only be having the first 7 characters of that name. So again, it doesn't break things where all of a sudden the application just completely fails or something. So we're trying to kind of be mindful of that part and piece as well. So very, very excited about that. There were a bunch of MQTT features and improvements. Some of them, if you've done anything with MQTT, is the ability to copy the configuration from one, basically one controller or one topic to another. Whereas in before, you didn't have the ability to do a copy paste style functionality on the MQTT configuration. So that is really, really nice. We're kind of building on top of that, trying to continue to enhance MQTT, because we definitely feel like, because of the whole IoT thing going to the cloud and all that, that is definitely going to be a really prevalent communication protocol. We also have added the ability to back up and restore dashboards independently of a backup of the controller. So that was a request from many of you that said, hey, I built this really awesome dashboard for a VAV or a rooftop. I just want the dashboard. I don't want to have to take a whole backup of the controller, restore it, and then go in and modify, BACnet addressing and blah, blah, blah. I just want the dashboard. So we gave that ability as well. So this is going to be, the plan is coming probably here in the next 2 to 3 weeks is when we're going to be doing a rollout. So it'll be right before Christmas. So Merry Christmas, everybody. But that is going to be the plan of getting this rolled out. Some of you are part of our beta team and have been playing with this as well as myself, and I am incredibly impressed. So if there is anybody on the call that is interested in beta testing firmware, software, new controllers when they come out, please run through, let us know. Get with Brody, get with Frank. We can, obviously we'll get together and make sure that you're all set up if that's something that you want to do, to go out and test these new things. Okay. All right, so let's talk about firmware. Let me check my time, make sure I'm doing okay. All right, good. So we are going to be updating firmware, obviously based off of the new CPT 2.0 or Sedona 2.0, or whatever term you want to use there, because you got to be able to have the additional kits or the functions in those kits for, all these new, expanded kit size, naming conventions, and all that. So while we're doing that, we're going to do more things as well. So we are going to add a BACnet server COV to the FW. We already have that in the FS right now. FS is kind of our flagship. I believe everybody knows that. So that's basically our proving ground. So we usually come out with features in the FS. If they work as we fix problems and so on and so forth, then we roll that back into the FW and then potentially into the FT, right? So BACnet server, COV to the FW. We actually created a mapping visualization for the spanning tree protocol routing path. So the idea behind that is when you create this loop, it'll show, it's not like a full network architecture. So I don't want you to think that way, right? Because when you connect to a controller, it's basically going to look at its 2 ports, right? Left port and right port on the Ethernet, and it's going to see what's connected to and what's alive and what's not alive. And so if something changes there and like it was alive and all of a sudden it's not, what we can do is we can actually bring that back into Sedona and we can create an alarm based off of that saying, hey, something changed, right? We don't know if that cable got cut or something, so on and so forth. if you're not super familiar with the ideology or the concept behind spanning tree or rapid spanning tree or a media redundancy protocol, they're basically all the same. It's all about fixing like a self-healing loop. It's all about fixing a problem. So when you think about this loop and you have 5 controllers in a loop, so the first comes out of the switch, goes controller 1, all the way to number 5, out of number 5, back to that network switch, right? So you have a full true loop. Now we know in Ethernet, when you do that, without having any type of the spanning tree or any type of like that self-healing mechanism, it creates a network storm, right? Because you basically have packets going back and forth. So at our controller level, we basically look at that and then we'll shut off the right or the left port. Okay, so that's perfect. That's what we want. We don't want to basically have a loop in your network. Now, when you in a production environment, you install it, everything's perfect. If something happens and a network cable gets cut, the idea, again, the ideology behind spanning trees, it's going to try to fix itself. So it's going to say, okay, well, I can't talk this way, so let me open this port and let me talk back this way, right? So basically opens another pipe, if you want to think about it that way, to get that data flowing. Now, if you don't know that that cable's been cut, then you don't know there's a problem and you don't know that something needs to be fixed. So that's where this piece comes in with this the routing paths and this UI, is it kind of shows what is connected and what's not. So our initial implementation of that will be somewhat limited, just being honest here, but we are going to continue to enhance on top of that. And it all is done through the web page. It's all HTML5. It's JSON specifically. So you'll see the little nodes and so on and so forth. Okay. Another thing that we came out with, because we are JCI, and JCI does have some pretty cool sensors that on their SA bus are called the NS sensors. We wanted to make sure that we were able to integrate these sensors, these room controllers, easily into our controllers. So what we've done is we've added the ability to support the NS controllers or the NS sensors. So that would be the NS 7000, the NS 8000 series, touchscreen, color, blah 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 sensors. So what we've done is essentially we add a object in the user library that allows you to drag that out, and it's got all of the properties and configurations and kind of stuff that you need to be able to pull those devices in. These devices do communicate on the BACnet MSTP network, so you can have a couple of these controllers plus I keep saying controllers, I apologize, a couple of these sensors with a couple other controllers on them, all in the same BACnet, and they will communicate fine. Maximum of 5, just like everything else on the FW series specifically. So you have that ability to be able to pull those in without any problems. I know, a couple of the people that are on this call have been dealing with that and been super instrumental in helping us go through and troubleshoot and beta test and do all that with this implementation of the NS sensors. Another thing that I don't have listed here, it might be on another screen slide, I don't remember, to be honest, but I'm going to talk about it now, is we have added the ability to have multi-state variables on our BACnet server. So initially, when you go to create BACnet variables in EasyIO and CPT, it was all AVs and BVs, right? Which is fine, because when you look at it from a very basic core fundamentalism, if that's even a word that I'm trying to bring here, is an MSV is essentially a float, right? It's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But the thing with MSVs is you have states that are associated with that number. So what we've done is we've got many requests to add MSVs, so we have done that. So our initial implementation is we're going to have 32 states for our MSVs. And if you've done any of our what's the word I'm looking for, like drop down buttons on our widgets and so on and so forth, basically what you do is you put a value, or you put like a number, right? 0, and then you would put a state that's associated with it, then a comma, and then state, like, so 0 would be off, comma, 1 would be low, comma, 2 would be medium, so on and so forth. So we have the ability to do 32 of those states in our initial implementation here. So I've already talked to our development team about increasing that up and giving the ability to do multiple different things. But I mean, hey, for our first run out of the gate doing USVs, that's pretty cool. So we're pretty excited about that as well. Okay. Let's talk about the batch tool. So the batch tool has been something that we've been working with for quite a while now, honestly. Again, some of you have actually even beta tested all the way from the original one where it was all command prompt to this new one, which is basically GUI based. So what the batch tool allows you to do is batch functions like upgrade firmware in the FW and the FS series controllers right now. No FG, sorry. Again, FGs have been end of life back in July, I believe is what it was. So there's not going to be any more development on the FG unless we find a bug or a security vulnerability or something. So with the batch tool, again, it's supporting the FW and the FS. The idea behind it is specifically it was designed for an FW implementation where you have, let's say, 100 VAV boxes and you need to upgrade the firmware. Going to every one of those controllers one by one by one by one was miserable. So what you could do, what the batch tool allows you to do is basically take an IP address range, and this can be done via CSV file. Basically, you set up what my IP addresses are, so on and so forth. You can import that in, and then you have what's called workflows and automations. Workflow is what you want to do, right? So, I mean, like, do I want to back up the controller first, and then I take that backup, and then I convert it to where it can now be read in an XML format, and then I update all of the kits that are associated with that application, confirm that that works. Okay, good. Now at that point, after all that works, then I can go ahead and update the firmware of the controller, make sure the controller gets its firmware update, run a check against the firmware version. Okay, now the controller is good. Perfect. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna restore, or I'm gonna upload the updated version of the application into the controller. Once it's in there, then I can do a restore of that, and then I can delete any backups that were on the controller because those backups would be on the old firmware. So I can do that in that workflow. Basically, I set that up by hitting drop downs and a little bit of syntax to figure out how I want that to work. And then the automation piece is basically saying what controllers do you want to do what with. So even though I have, 5 controllers, I can have different workflows for those 5 controllers or 10 controllers or whatever they are. Okay. So the initial implementation of the tool is it's still in beta. We're getting ready to, like I said, we're getting ready to release in December. I believe we're saying we're trying to limit it to about 10 controllers at a time right now. So we have done more, yes. I myself have done more than 10. But we're basically publicly saying try to do about 10 controllers at a time, let it run through its workflow. Basically, you set it up, walk away, go get a cup of coffee, come back, and then you'll be moving on down the road. Okay, do the next 10. So pretty cool little tool. All right. Let's talk a little bit about new products. So this is something that you may or may not have seen or heard about. This is our PoE adapter. So essentially what this is a PoE splitter. So if you're in the network world, it's a splitter. So what happens is because everything's going, network based, we've known this, we've all been there. It becomes way more efficient to run one Ethernet cable that does data and power than it is to run an Ethernet cable plus a completely separate 24-volt low voltage line, right? So the majority of the network switches nowadays are PoE, which stands for Power over Ethernet. So the idea behind it is kind of what you see here is you'll take one Ethernet cable from a network closet, go to this little PoE adapter. You get a PoE in. What this thing does is it splits the data and then it splits the power. So on the bottom right there, might be a little tough to see. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but right there where it says ETH out, what that is, that's just a standard data line. So you would connect an Ethernet cable from that ETH out to your controller. And it doesn't have to be an EasyIO controller. This is not specific to EasyIO, okay? This is basically, like I said, it's a PoE splitter. So takes standard data out, and then it also provides 24-volt DC on 2 separate terminal blocks at the top. Okay, so this is class 3, if I remember correctly. I really should have paid more attention. Oh, I apologize. I should have looked this up. I believe it's class 3, which, if I remember correctly, is 25 watts of power that this thing will be able to spit out. So should be able to power a controller, and depending on your actuator type, potentially 2 actuators. So if you do like, a really, really small, if you're a Belimo person, you use a really, really small LM controller, those are like 7 watts of power a piece. So that's 14 plus our controller on max is about 12 watts. You're really close to that 2025, right? So as long as you're not using every output at the exact same time, driving everything, then, one of these would be able to do, a VAV box, no problem. I have one of these controllers on my test wall, and it's powering up 6 different controllers. So I basically have one PoE and it's powering 6 controllers. But let me just make sure and do the safety note here, is that my controllers are for testing purposes. I'm not driving every output, so on and so forth. Typically I'll connect to my controller, I'll run some logic through it, and so on and so forth. So, but pretty cool little device that if you do have a PoE installation, it can save you potential time, potential money, without having to run, low voltage cabling, especially if you get in scenarios where you got to run that low voltage cabling and conduit. This would save you tons and tons of money because there's going to be an Ethernet cable ran anyways. Okay. All right. So this is another thing that we are talking about, and it is you may have heard about it, you may not, but we lovingly call it the FS0. Okay. So supervisor in development. So what we're doing here is we're essentially taking the Sedona framework, and we're going to be rolling out a supervisor style implementation of it. Now, it's going to start based off of the FS framework. So it's going to look like an FS controller, except small. No IO will be on it. So it's basically just going to be a supervisor box. So it's going to have tons of processor power, which, it's going to have the 1.2 gigahertz quad core processor. It's going to have 8 gigabytes of flash. And then the plan of attack is to basically have that as a supervising framework. So, and what we mean by that is you'll be able to connect to that controller, and that controller will then be able to tunnel down into other controllers. So you'll be able to actually program through that FS0. So that remote connectivity and doing that remote programming becomes much easier. It also, the idea is on the graphics side as well, is we're going to try to enhance the ability to take those data points and serve them up on a graphic. So if you're a Niagara person, you're very familiar with JACEs coming up through the Niagara network to the supervisor and having those proxy extensions and so on and so forth, right? But what that does is that takes additional labor. You have to bring those up. So if we're almost doing, again, if you're a Niagara person, we're almost doing an implementation of like virtuals, is the way that the kind of idea behind it is. You're basically pointing to that point, and then through web services, it's going to go down and it's going to grab the data. So you're not going to actually be having to discover a point from an FS32 up into the FS0, right? It basically is just a referencer or a pointer, if you want to think about it that way, to go grab that data. Okay. Another thing that we're doing, and it's not on this page, but I want to make sure I hit on this, is you start looking at all of the communication protocols that are out there. And you have MQTT, you have BACnet, you have all these different things, right? So what we're doing is we are going to try to enhance the communication implementation by using what's called the adopt protocol. I'm not going to get super deep into that today, but what it's going to do, it's going to be 100% web services based. So you're not going to have to worry about proprietary blah blah blahs, none of that stuff, because EasyIO is not proprietary. We don't play in that world. But we're going to try to implement all this stuff and make things a lot easier by having data flowing via a very simple communication protocol that does multiple things. It's not just one specific thing that it's going to do, right? You'll still have BACnet, you're still going to have MQTT, absolutely 110%. But it's just going to be a different way of how we are going to work with dealing with these web services and protocols and so on and so forth. So obviously a part of all of our implementations is the security piece. So with the FS0, we're going to have tons and tons of security features built into it. Like we said, the idea is, You're going to connect to this one controller on site, and then from there, you'll be able to program every controller that you need. You don't have to worry about doing, port forwarding. You don't have to worry about even, worrying about, specific separate things. It's going to be very, very streamlined and easy connectivity, and that's really what we want to do through this tunneling piece. Okay. Hope that's exciting. So here's just kind of a summary view of what we've done, what we have, and where we're going, right? So when you start looking at 2020, so basically if you can see my mouse, I hope you can, we're right here in December, right? So we came out with firmware upgrades. Hopefully you have seen the benefits of the firmware upgrades that we've been putting out. People that are longtime EasyIO users, you've probably noticed, I don't want to call it a lack, but a reduced amount of firmware updates coming out. We're doing that purposefully. It's not that we're sitting on our butts, not doing anything. We don't want to put out a firmware every week, right? So we're unless there's a massive bug or something, we're going to hold that to a release, and then we're trying to do releases of firmware either quarterly or biannually. That's kind of the plan of attack. So that's why you're kind of seeing more stuff come out at once instead of little things come out more often, basically. All right. And then CPT, we try to put out CPT twice a year. So the last the last global official version came out in May. We're going to be coming out with a new one in December. So it's going to be approximately on a 6-month cycle for that. So you should see that coming out, like I said, here in the next 2 to 3 weeks, as well as new firmware that's going to be associated with this new CPT 2.0. You're going to see a lot of that stuff happening as well. And then, obviously in the March, we're hoping for March, April is going to be the supervisor preview. That, I repeat, that will not be the official release. This is going to be basically going out. I don't want to say a proof of concept because we already have that, but it's going to be going out and seeing smell test. Let's put it that way, right? Here's what we think we want to have happen to select partners. We're going to be like, hey, let's look at it. Let's talk about it. Let's get around the table and say, this is what we need. This is what we don't need, so on and so forth. Now, while all that's going on, I kind of skipped this top one here. So quality improvement measures, documentation, LMS, and testing. So this is an ongoing thing that we have been working on. So quality improvement measures, basically what that means is we're doing more internal testing. So part of the JCI acquisition has given us more resources to have internal testing. We are doing large site testing where we just did not have the physical area that we could before. So in Milwaukee, at the JCI headquarters, we have over 200 controllers set up on boards, and we're doing stress testing basically. So which has been super, super helpful. Documentation. We're updating all of our documentation. It's a process. It's not fast by any stretch of the imagination, but you're seeing user guides that are slowly starting to get updated. All of our product documentations are being updated. Installation instructions. So basically all the easy stuff like installation instructions, are being done first. User guides are going to be rolled out here. So this is going to be ongoing. LMS. So LMS is learning management system. So basically e-learnings, on-demand learnings, that type of stuff, that is slowly getting implemented as well. So lots of different things that are happening that are continuing to improve more and more and more. Okay. Got to throw on the good old JCI hat here and talk about what you also have access to. So the peripherals. So if you are looking for valves, actuators, sensors, that type of stuff, you can definitely have, even if you're not a JCI partner. So if you're like, man, I don't buy anything JCI, I'm not an NFX person, blah, 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 whatever. You do have the ability through your EasyIO agreement to have access to all of this stuff. In the JCI world, they call it tier 4 products. So that, again, that's your sensors, that's your valves and actuators and that type of stuff. So you absolutely can have access to that. But that is 100% up to you and Brody. You pick what's best for your job. I hope EasyIO's on it and whatever else, that's up to whatever else, okay? But you do have access to multiple things now, okay? All right. So that is all I had as far as talking about the roadmap. One thing I will make sure and mention on a sadder note, many of you know Gina Elliott. So Gina Elliott is no longer with EasyIO. She had a really good opportunity for her in her professional growth, and her last day was the Friday before Thanksgiving. So she is no longer with EasyIO. Unfortunately, she definitely will be missed. So we have a new business development leader for EasyIO. It's a gentleman named Randy Alvis. Randy he's been around for a long time. I've known Randy from back when I was in contractor days. He basically would head up the JCI Verisys stuff. So if you do anything with Verisys, and you're very familiar with Randy, but Randy has taken the hat of EasyIO as well. So give him time. He doesn't know much about EasyIO, but Randy's obviously a very smart guy. He knows controls. He knows a lot of things. With myself and other members of our team, we're getting Randy up to speed on the EasyIO part and piece of the business. So definitely, if you do need anything from any of us, obviously you can reach out. But you got Brody. For the contractors that are on this, you got Brody, which is just absolutely fantastic. That you got Frank, you got Joe, you got everybody. I shouldn't even name people because I know I'm going to forget, and I don't want anybody to feel left out. They're a great team of people that support you in everything from EasyIO to everything they offer. So if you do have questions, obviously they can help out. If they or you want to get in touch with anybody with EasyIO/JCI, let us know. That's what we're here for. So if you have any questions at this point in time, definitely feel free. We can open up either the phone lines or the chat. Let us know. Let us know if you have any questions. If you have thoughts, if you're like, man, this, about freaking time you guys came out with and broke that, that naming characteristic limitation. We're good for hearing that also. So just let us know. Let us know what, if anything, you have. Last thing I'm going to do in the chat, I am going to put. I mentioned Randy Alvis is the business development leader for EasyIO now. I'm going to put his email address in here. So if you do want to contact him and say, hey, welcome, or, turn around and run as fast as you can, that is 100% up to you. But I want to make sure that you do have his information here. All right. So I just put that in the chat. And Frank, we can open it up to anybody that's got questions, comments, or concerns.
Everybody's set up to self-unmute themselves. So if anybody has anything, unmute yourself before you start speaking. Come on, Brett, you've got a comment or two.
I know. Like, I was about to call him out too, Frank.
Crickets.
Man, either I did really good or really bad. That's the way I always look at it, Frank.
Great information.
So, yeah.
So, but I couldn't find the damn unmute button. Here I am. I'm like clicking all around. Yeah, no, I think yeah, it's very exciting stuff. The training that you guys were doing over the summer was phenomenal. That was really, really good. But one thing that I did have a question on. So you said the dashboard stuff will be able to copy and paste around between controllers as well, similar to how you're doing the MQTT?
Yes, that's correct. Absolutely. So if you, yeah, absolutely. It was needed for sure. So if the people that aren't super familiar with this piece of it, on the FW, well, actually, on the FW and the FS, you have a dashboard piece, right? So you don't need the full customizable graphics. And specifically on the FW, where you would potentially have 50 of the same VAV box, but different controllers, you would create a dashboard for it. And initially you would have to back up the whole controller and then restore that whole application, which would kind of suck. So if you're just like, hey, I want this, I got this dashboard set up and I want to go from job to job to job with this dashboard, you can now copy that configuration or that dashboard completely out separately and then paste that through to all of your future jobs, which again, it's just a time saver. Instead of having to worry about, modifying applications, it's literally just a dashboard piece, which is pretty cool.
Awesome. Is there any FTO4 MQTT stuff coming down the pipeline?
We're talking about it. I mean, actually, we've been talking about it for a while. We absolutely, it's definitely on. I don't want to call it the roadmap because obviously I would have talked about it, but it's definitely in our mind's eye. We know that that little controller is probably the epitome of IoT. So having MQTT inside of it is I'm not going to say, I'm going to say it. It's essential. So it's definitely something we're looking at doing. We just want to make sure that the processor that's inside of the controller can handle everything that we want to do with it, plus all of the normal functionality that we got to have in the controller. So that's our plan.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
Questions? All right. Who else? Don't be shy.
Well, I got a question about the NS sensor. So how is that going to connect? Is that going to connect MSTP on the bus, so it's a BACnet MSTP device, or how will that work?
Great question, Peter. Okay, so okay, so if dang it, you're recording this, Frank. Okay, I was going to say I will deny, but okay. So here's the deal. The SA bus is essentially a BACnet MSTP slave network. So yeah, so that all you're going to do, Peter, is you're going to connect up that SA bus to a BACnet MSTP network, and then based off, I mean, part of the instructions and so on and so forth, and the documentation will say, here's what basically, here's what your address is, here's how you set it, here's how you do this, that, and the other thing, and there's going to be steps that are associated with, because if for the people that aren't super familiar with BACnet slave, it's non-discoverable. So basically, you have to know what the address is, you have to manually add it. Once you manually add it, you probably want to change the address because all of the NS sensors in this case will be the same address. So you have to go in and change the address. So we actually have that ability to change the object ID inside of the new CPT to write down, kind of like what Niagara does. If you could set your device ID in Niagara, we have that functionality now in CPT 2.0 to be able to do that. But yeah, you'll basically go out and send that, and then we're going to already have all the points configured and all that stuff. So when you drag it out of the user library that we provide you, it's literally just drag it out, and man, all the addressing stuff, other than the physical device itself, is done. Like all the variables are taken care of. And it's just I don't want to say it just works because nothing ever just works. We're all control people, we know that. But it pops in, and then as long as you got it configured right, you'll start pulling data really quickly and really easily, which is nice.
So that being said, if I have a dozen VAV boxes and I have a dozen NS sensors, I will have a daisy chain of 24 devices on the MSTP bus?
Theoretically, yes. If you daisy chain every one of those, yes, you would. Now, obviously, on the FW piece itself, you can only bring in 5 devices from the client side, and that NS sensor would be considered a client, right? But yeah, you would theoretically have 24 devices on the MSTP network at that point.
Okay, so is there any plan at any time? The thing I see is, at least for my situation, is that I do a lot of replacement MSTP devices.
Mm-hmm.
And I work on a lot of networks that are pretty full, pretty loaded. And I'm wondering, like, boy, if I wanted to change all these sensors with NS sensors, I'm going to have a bus problem. Like that, it's going to stop me from being able to do that. So will there be any plan in the future to take maybe the Modbus bus, which I don't use too often, and make that a true, well, I don't know if you want to call it a BACnet slave network or a SA bus, similar to what a PCG might have?
So on the FW, absolutely not at this point, because it's only got the one RS-485. So there's no plan to add an additional RS-485 on the FW. We do have a plan on the FW series coming out, and I didn't put it on our slides, but coming out probably sometime next week. We're going to be changing the PCB of the FW to allow for the voltage on the NS sensor, because those NS sensors are powered by 15 volt DC. So we're going to have basically a step down transformer in our controller that takes 24 volt AC DC and converts it over to 15 volt DC, so you can power the NS directly from our controller. But on the RS-485 part, no. on the FW. There's no plan of that. It's definitely something we're talking about. So I can definitely bring that up to the team, Peter, and kind of get their thoughts and all that, because you brought up a really good instance of why you'd almost want to have two separate buses or two separate RS-45 links. On the FS series, where you do have the dual RS-45 ports, that is something that I have been talking with our engineering department on, is having that D2 port be able to be used for BACnet as well. From the software side, it's very easy. The problem is that if you remember, all of our FS controllers have dual processors. You have the main processor, and then you have a secondary processor, which is for IO control, as well as BACnet MSTP token passing. Well, that second processor is linked to the D1 COM port. So this is something that I've talked with our engineering group about, of do we just link the second COM port to that second processor, or do we have to do a completely other processor, or how do we do it? So that's something that we're looking into. I'm not going to say fast. We're not looking into that super fast, but is something that has been talked about multiple times. It's a great question.
Okay, thank you for that answer.
All right, we got like 6 minutes left. Anybody else? Don't be shy. All right, well, Frank, I think unless anybody pipes up, I think we're probably good.
Right. Well, I do appreciate your time and going through all this for us, and thank everybody for attending this session. As I said, this is recorded, or being recorded, so we'll have it up on BP Tech Center hopefully later tomorrow. I'll go back and review it.
Awesome. Well, Frank, hey, I want to thank you and the Brody team for just being awesome. I'm just going to lay it out very blunt. You guys are awesome doing this type of stuff. It helps us as manufacturers get out there, let customers know what's going on, and then obviously from the customer standpoint, it keeps you guys engaged into new products, new offerings, new technologies, new everything. So, thank you so much, Brody, for doing this, and everybody out there, thank you for your time. If you have questions, let us know.
Great. Okay. Thank you, and thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
All right. Have a great week, everybody.
Bye.